It actually happened. Westbrook and John Wall got swapped. And I honestly cannot believe it. This trade, I kind of laughed at when I first saw it rumored because it seemed like such a pointless trade for both sides. And now it's actually here. I talked about before how nobody would want John Wall and how he'd be impossible to trade unless you traded him for a guy like Russell Westbrook, and here we are. As for the trade, for the Rockets, I guess this is your attempt at trying to stay competitive without John Wall. Because if you're trying to blow it up, trading for John Wall makes 0 sense. Because John Wall, we don't know if he's going to be as good as he used to be, but he can still be good enough to get you wins. Definitely doesn't get you younger. Definitely doesn't help you save money. So I guess trading for John Wall is just an attempt to stay somewhat relevant. Even though players like John Wall have really shown to not pair well with James Harden. I mean, is this really any different than the Westbrook pairing? I don't know. As for the Wizards, I mean, why not? There was no way to get off Wall's contract, really, so might as well trade him for just a better player on pretty much the same contract. Russell Westbrook, you could argue isn't like the best player when it comes to winning games, but he'll help you win more games probably than a injured John Wall would. How does the fit alongside Bradley Beal go? I mean, like, it might be a little awkward because Russell Westbrook wanted to be in a place where he could be the primary ball handler, but I think he can be that in Washington. Beal doesn't really need the ball in his hands as much as a guy like James Harden. I mean, he played with John Wall for years, so he could easily adapt to the play style of Russell Westbrook. The Wizards, I think the Wizards with John Wall could have been a decent team, maybe 8th seed, or maybe they wouldn't have been as good. But now with Westbrook, I mean, does this make them the favorites to make the 8th seed, or to make the playoffs? I don't know. I still like the Hawks. I think the Magic are still, you always have to talk about the Magic. You still have question marks like the Hornets, so does this put the Wizards in the playoffs? I think it actually does, though. Like, I think if I had to make a guess, I'd put the Wizards in the playoffs. The Rockets, I mean, when you look at the roster, it is a good roster, don't get me wrong. With John Wall, Harden, you signed a Christian Wood, you still have guys like Eric Gordon, who, if healthy, which is a big question mark for Eric Gordon, can be one of the better 6-men in the league. You still have, role players like Daniel House. You still have DeMarcus Cousins, which you signed, that he could turn out really good. The Rockets have a lot of, could be really good players, like Cousins and Wall, or could not be very good. Does this change anything about the James Harden rumors? I mean, the Rockets have said they don't want to trade James Harden, and I think the trade for Wall shows that. If you were looking to trade James Harden, then there's no reason you would trade Russell Westbrook for John Wall, who would be a player to help you win now. I mean, he'll help you win less than you would with Westbrook, but still a win-now player regardless. I mean, there's a chance that the John Wall trade could go over really well for Houston. Maybe he fits better than Westbrook did, and maybe he can get back to his old self. But even if John Wall gets back to his old self, I still don't see how this makes them any better. They probably would just end up being the same. Russell Westbrook and John Wall are very similar players. They're not amazing shooters. They're explosive off the dribble and driving to the rim, fantastic playmakers. Except you imagine Wall will no longer be as explosive as he was coming off his injuries. And as for his contracts, I mean, I think Westbrook had 1 less year on his contract. So, if you're the Wizards, you get off that money a little earlier. But if you're the Rockets, you just have to pay him even longer. I get that Westbrook's market wasn't really there because he requested a trade. But the thing is, same with John Wall. And maybe John Wall's market was just so little that the only person you could trade him for was another guy whose market was little, aka Russell Westbrook. Except it still somehow feels like the Wizards pulled off so much of a better trade that makes sense for them, more than the Rockets. Now, you could say the Wizards should be looking to blow it up, because they're not going to be that good. But at the end of the day, when you're stuck with John Wall's contract, there is no blowing it up, because the pairing of Beal and Wall will get you wins, and there is no trading Wall. So if you're going to trade Wall, you have to trade him to get better, because you can't trade him to get worse. No one's going to take that contract for younger players or, picks or anything like that. So you take what you can get, and if Westbrook's on the table, I think you did that trade every time. if I had to grade these trades, I mean, Wizards get like a B, B plus, just because you still have a really bad contract alongside Bradley Beal, who the fit is still going to be questionable, but is an upgrade. And for the Rockets, it's like a D for me, because you get worse, but you still try to stay competitive, but it's not really like this just makes you worse. That's all I can really say. I mean, maybe I should give them credit for being able to trade Westbrook and stay competitive. And I think you could make that argument that, hey, this is a good trade because they're able to trade one of their stars and stay good. But there is no guarantee with Wall. You could end up with a player who barely plays and is a terrible fit, the same amount of money for longer. This could turn out to be a terrible deal, or it could turn out to be decent. So I think we'll just have to wait and see. It still just feels like a very stupid 1-for-1 trade for both sides. Like, why not just keep the original player? But, this stuff only really happens in the NBA. You don't just see stars get swapped like this that often. So, it's always fun to see, always fun to talk about. But we'll have to see how much this affects the landscape of the East and West. Probably not that much, but you might see the Wizards be better, the Rockets be worse, or maybe the same. I don't know. I'm rooting for John Wall. I hope he can, get back to being his old self. I just have high doubts. So, Rockets, Wizards, big time move.